Hello everyone. Today we are going to start with the first topic of respiratory system, that is acute bronchiolitis. So we will discuss this topic under following headings, that is review of airway anatomy, that will be a review of basic anatomy of lower respiratory tract, and physiological handicaps related to airway anatomy in infants. Then we will define the problem, what is known as bronchiolitis, its pathophysiology, what are the risk factors responsible for it, its clinical features, diagnosis, treatment, prognosis and complications, and we will look about some aspects of preventing bronchiolitis in high risk group. So the lower respiratory tract starts below the vocal cords. It leads to trachea. Trachea divides at the level of carina into right and left main bronchus. Both the bronchi enter the lungs at hyla, and then these bronchi progressively branch and divide into lobar segmental, subsegmental bronchi, which further divides into more branches of smaller bronchi, and progressive branching of bronchi forms bronchioles. So, as you all know that we divide this progressive branches of our lower airway into 23 generations. So, up to 16th generation, the bronchi divides and forms terminal bronchioles. Till the level of terminal bronchioles, no respiratory activity is happening. It is only a conducting pathway. So, bronchioles are distinguished from bronchi by the lack of cartilage and submucosal glands within their walls. Further branching of bronchioles lead to the respiratory bronchioles, which are less than 2 mm in diameter. So, the part of the lung which is distal to the terminal bronchiole is known as acinus. And what is this acinus comprised of? Acinus is comprised of respiratory bronchioles. Each respiratory bronchioles gives off several alveoli from its sides. Respiratory bronchiole leads to alveolar ducts, and alveolar ducts end into alveolar sac, which is the blind end of our lower respiratory tract, and it is the site of gas exchange. So, this is how our lower respiratory tract is progressively divided into 23 generations, and beyond 16th generation, the part which forms acinus, that is respiratory bronchiole, alveolar duct and alveolar sac, is known as terminal respiratory unit. So, the cluster of 3 to 5 terminal bronchiole with its appended acinus is known as pulmonary lobule. You must also know few peculiarities about the cells in the bronchiole. So, the bronchiolar cells produce serous secretions which are rich in mucolytic and proteolytic enzymes. These enzymes liquefy the mucus secreted elsewhere in the bronchial tree above the bronchioles. There are some functional beta 2 receptors in bronchiolar smooth muscle cells. These beta 2 receptors are yet of unknown significance, and as we all know that there is no direct sympathetic innervation of bronchi and bronchioles, but during the conditions of hypoxia, catecholamines are released locally in these bronchioles, and these catecholamines may be acting upon. This figure shows again 23 generations of our lower respiratory tract beginning from trachea up to the alveolar sac. The point to be noticed in this diagram is the progressive decrease in the diameter of the respiratory tract of further generations. As you can see, respiratory bronchioles have a diameter of less than 2 mm, and these respiratory bronchioles, alveolar ducts, alveolar sacs, these comprise the small airway of our lower respiratory tract, and these small airways or peripheral airways contribute to 50% of the total airway resistance in infants as compared to 20% of total airway resistance in adults. So, why this concept of peripheral airway resistance contributing to 50% of total airway resistance is important? Because obstruction to airflow while breathing is dependent upon two factors. First is airway size, second is infant lung compliance. So, as we all know, these smaller airways are less than 1 mm in diameter, and they contribute to more than 50% of the total airway resistance. So, any further decrease in their size will lead to exponential increase in the airway resistance. As you all know from Poiseuille's equation, that resistance to airflow is inversely proportional to fourth power of the radius of the airway. So, 1 mm concentric edema in an infant airway with radius of less than 2 mm will lead to an increase in resistance to airflow about 16 times. And second factor, infant lung compliance. Infants have highly compliant chest wall. Because of this, inward pressure produced in normal expiration causes the intrathoracic airways to collapse. So, two factors are occurring. Whenever there is a concentric edema in smaller airways, there is a resistance to airflow. Moreover, during expiration, these airways collapse, leading to complete obstruction of airflow. So, that is why infants have a physiological handicap that whenever these smaller airways are affected, it leads to significant obstruction in airflow and hence the symptoms that you should understand by this review of anatomy. So, as I told you earlier, obstruction to airflow depends upon airway size and infant lung compliance, and the resistance to airflow is inversely proportional to the fourth power of the radius. So, any decrease in the radius due to inflammation or edema will lead to exponential increase in airway resistance, and due to highly compliant chest wall in infants, during expiration normally also the intrathoracic airways tend to collapse, and this tendency increases during disease state. So, now as we know the basic airway anatomy, every one of you can make it out from this term bronchiolitis that it is an inflammation of small airways of the lungs or inflammation of bronchioles. So, acute bronchiolitis is a diagnostic term used to describe the clinical picture produced by several different viral lower respiratory tract infections in infants and very young children. What do I mean by very young children? Children of less than 2 years of age. It is usually preceded by a 2-3 days history of cough, cold and rhinitis, which is called viral prodrome, and it is typically characterized by fever of moderate grade, rapid breathing with signs of airway obstruction, wheezing and hyperinflation of lungs. So that is how we define bronchiolitis. Coming to etiology, the most common cause of bronchiolitis in infants in India is respiratory syncytial virus. It accounts for up to 80% of the cases. The second most common cause in India is rhinoviruses. Other than respiratory syncytial virus and rhinoviruses, parainfluenza virus, adenovirus and influenza virus also lead to acute bronchiolitis, and there has been a emerging role of two viruses, human bocavirus and human metapneumovirus, as a causative agent of acute bronchiolitis. So protection against respiratory syncytial virus is mediated by antibodies of immunoglobulin G3 subclass. These antibodies have a short half-life and do not cross the placenta in substantial amount, so as to offer protection to the infant. And because of that, infants are vulnerable for RSV infection since birth, because they don't have protective maternal antibodies in significant amount. But on the contrary, the infants who are breastfed, they tend to receive high amount of secretory IgA antibodies in the colostrum, which decreases the possibility of hospitalization whenever they suffer from bronchiolitis. So though the infants are born unprotected from bronchiolitis due to absence of maternal antibodies against RSV in significant titer, the breastfeeding is protective against bronchiolitis. Coming to epidemiology, the peak incidence of acute bronchiolitis is seen in infants of 1 to 6 months of age, usually during the months of September to March, that is the winter season. The spread of respiratory syncytial virus or other viruses causing acute bronchiolitis is through large droplets. What do we mean by large droplets? Whenever a person who is infected with such viruses, usually an adult in a family, coughs or sneezes, he throws out these viruses in his respiratory secretions in form of large droplets. These droplets do not travel beyond 2 to 3 meters from that person, and they tend to settle down easily on the surfaces. So whenever another person comes in contact with that surface, he tends to acquire infection from that contact. Hence, hand-borne infection control measures are most important measures to prevent these droplet-borne infections. The recent droplet-borne infection which we are facing, because of which we are having these online session, is COVID-19, that you all must be knowing. So coming to the pathogenesis, once an infant acquires the infection through droplet route, there is acute inflammation, necrosis of small airway epithelium, mucosal edema, excessive mucus secretion and bronchospasm. These are the hallmarks of acute bronchiolitis, all of which ultimately lead to airway edema. As you can see here, RSV enters our body through upper respiratory tract and then it proliferates. Direct injury due to viral replication as well as immune response to respiratory syncytial virus is responsible for RSV related damage to airway epithelium. Acute inflammation, edema, necrosis, and necrosis of epithelial cells lining the small airways, increased mucus production, and bronchospasm. These are all the changes which occur in bronchiolitis. As you can see, this is a normal airway without any tissue necrosis, without any excessive mucosal production and bronchospasm, with adequately inflated alveoli. In case of bronchiolitis, because of necrosis of epithelium, mucus buildup, and inflammation of tissue and bronchospasm, this airway gets narrowed and sometimes it gets partially blocked. When the blockage of this airway is partial, the air entering the alveolar sac during inspiration gets trapped inside the alveoli and some of the air is released during expiration. This air trapping leads to overinflated alveoli and emphysematous changes. When the blockage of this small airway is complete instead of partial, whatever air is entering gets trapped, is not released, and then whatever air is trapped there gets reabsorbed after some time, leading to atelectasis. So, the bronchiolitis is characterized by patchy atelectasis and emphysematous changes. So, to sum up, partial obstruction leads to air trapping and emphysema. Complete obstruction of an airway leads to patchy atelectasis, and this emphysema and patchy atelectasis ultimately leads to ventilation perfusion mismatch, and this ventilation perfusion mismatch leads to hypoxemia and respiratory acidosis. There may be recurrence of a RSV infection, as natural RSV infection does not lead to development of protective immunity. The regeneration of this damaged epithelium usually starts within 3-4 days after resolution of symptoms. So, all these pathophysiologic changes of airway inflammation, excessive mucus production, airway obstruction, and bronchospasm leads to emphysema, patchy atelectasis, and ventilation perfusion mismatch, and all these result in the clinical manifestation of acute bronchiolitis, which we are going to see. The disease often starts with a prodrome of upper respiratory tract infection, which is characterized by rhinorrhea with or without fever. A history of upper respiratory tract infection in a household contact is common, which acts as a source for the affected infant. Within 2-3 days, the breathing becomes fast and respiratory distress develops. Depending upon the severity of disease, child may manifest lower chest indrawing, intercostal indrawing, or suprasternal indrawing. During this phase, which lasts from day 3 till day 10 to day 12 of illness, there is persistent cough, increased work of breathing, there is fever which can be moderately high. You can easily notice the use of accessory muscles during breathing. Expiration is prolonged and you may be able to hear wheeze or rales or both when you auscultate the chest of the infant. And the most significant thing is, and during this phase, the feeding of that infant is impaired because of respiratory distress, and this impaired feeding leads to further complications. Acute bronchiolitis due to RSV infection may be associated with apnea. Apnea is stopping of breathing. It is seen in 16 to 25% of infants, specifically those infants who are younger in age group, that is less than 3 months old, and are born preterm. Such infants, instead of presenting as respiratory distress, they may present as apnea when they suffer from acute bronchiolitis due to RSV. After 2 weeks of illness, the gradual resolution of symptoms with continued variability starts. New fever in late course during the recovery phase may suggest some co-infection like otitis media and pneumonia. Otherwise, by this time the patient is afebrile and the respiratory symptoms start improving. However, minimal symptoms of cough and wheezing may continue for up to a month during this phase. So, we have seen that there are 3 phases. First, prodromal phase of 2-3 days, followed by an acute phase of respiratory distress and persistent cough, and followed by a phase of gradual resolution. And now you can see whatever pathophysiology we have seen in previous slides, that how does it correlates with clinical feature. So, during prodromal phase, the viral infects the epithelial cells of upper respiratory tract. These epithelial cells are sloughed off and they slough to lower respiratory tract. However, the lower respiratory tract at this point of time is completely normal. You can see this bronchiole which is seen in this histopathological section, which is normal. But during this acute phase and this phase of recovery, the lower respiratory tract gets infected and there is epithelial infection with edema, sloughing of cells into the airway, mucus production and airway obstruction and air trapping. Ciliary function gets impaired and the polymorphonuclear cells and lymphocytes proliferate in an inflammatory response. So, this is how an inflamed bronchiole looks like. And during this recovery phase, as soon as the clinical symptoms resolve within 3-4 days of resolution of clinical symptoms, the regeneration of epithelium starts. So, 25% of infants can present with apnea. That is the one clinical feature in very young infant who are born preterm, which is different from the typical clinical feature of acute bronchiolitis that you should remember. Now, how do we classify the clinical manifestations of bronchiolitis according to its severity? Bronchiolitis can be classified into mild, moderate and severe bronchiolitis based upon the child's ability to feed, respiratory distress and percentage saturation of hemoglobin as measured by pulse oximeter. So, in mild bronchiolitis, the child is able to feed normally, there is little or no respiratory distress and oxygen saturation is more than 95%. Fever may be present of moderate grade in 50% of infants. In moderate bronchiolitis, while feeding, the child can appear short of breath and it may lead to intermittent break in feeding. The respiratory distress is moderate with some chest wall retractions and nasal flaring. Infant is usually hypoxemic, but it can be corrected by supplying heated humidified oxygen and the corrected saturation will be more than 95% of hemoglobin. In severe bronchiolitis, the infant is lethargic, not able to feed, the respiratory distress is severe with marked chest wall retractions, nasal flaring, grunting. Infant has increasingly frequent and prolonged apneic episodes and the hypoxemia is not corrected by supplemental oxygen. Or predictors of severe bronchiolitis. So host factors which are responsible or which are the predictors of severe bronchiolitis are prematurity, age less than 3 months, any chronic pulmonary disease like bronchopulmonary dysplasia or other diseases, any hemodynamically significant congenital heart disease, any immunodeficiency state. Environmental factors which are predictor for severe bronchiolitis are passive smoking, older siblings at home which can act as a carrier, as a source for the younger infant, overcrowding at home, poor ventilation, and any history of daycare attendance by the infant, which again increases the chances of infection from some asymptomatic adult contact. Now coming to diagnosis. How can we diagnose acute bronchiolitis? So diagnosis of acute bronchiolitis is purely clinical. Based upon the history of typical viral prodrome with a history of any positive contact in home who has symptoms of upper respiratory tract infection, and viral prodrome followed by a phase of respiratory distress, and respiratory distress which is out of proportion to the signs, physical signs which we can see or find in the lungs during our examination, is suggestive of bronchiolitis. So how can we be certain that it is caused by RSV or any other etiological agent? We can take nasal washes, swabs, and do a ELISA or RT-PCR for viral confirmation. But whatever the result of this viral confirmation test may be, it does not changes the management of acute bronchiolitis. Hence, it is not recommended. On the basis of clinical diagnosis only, we can start our management of acute bronchiolitis. When we do X-ray in case of acute bronchiolitis, whenever we see that there is no response to treatment, or there is deterioration in clinical condition, or our diagnosis is doubtful, or we want to rule out some alternative diagnosis in infants especially who have congenital or chronic lung disease, we should get an X-ray done. In acute bronchiolitis, what findings do we get in an X-ray? We get hyperinflated chest because of air trapping, we get peribronchial thickening because of inflammation, and patchy atelectasis because of complete obstruction of small airways in parts of the lungs. So these findings can be seen in other diseases also. They are not specific for bronchiolitis, and patchy atelectasis may give a false impression that the child may be suffering from bronchopneumonia, and it may lead to unwarranted use of antibiotics in a case of acute bronchiolitis. So X-ray for a clinically diagnosed case of acute bronchiolitis is not necessary. It is indicated only for 3-4 conditions which I mentioned before. Differential diagnosis. First episode of bronchial asthma, pneumonia, congestive cardiac failure due to viral myocarditis, or any hemodynamically significant congenital heart disease. These are all the differential diagnosis of acute bronchiolitis. First episode of asthma may not be preceded by a viral prodrome. There will be a history of atopy in family or in that infant, and it may not respond to usual measures of treatment which we take for acute bronchiolitis. So that is how we can differentiate the first episode of bronchial asthma from acute bronchiolitis. Now, coming to treatment, how do we manage? So, mild cases of bronchiolitis which don't have any difficulty in feeding, have normal oxygenation, require symptomatic supportive therapy. The feeding should be continued. Antipyretic should be given for fever. Nasal saline drops should be instilled regularly to clear the nasal airway, and local decongestant drops can be used to decongest the airways. Other than this, nothing much is required in mild cases of acute bronchiolitis, and we can just counsel the parents regarding the danger signs as to when they should come back to seek medical attention for their child. For moderate to severe cases of acute bronchiolitis, the first supportive care is humidified oxygen. So, it is indicated when oxygen saturation is less than 90%. Oxygen should be administered by a nasopharyngeal cannula or a mask that should be kept little away from the face of the infant. If the infant does not tolerate the conventional masks or hoods or prongs, then we should keep it just little away from the face of the infant. Persistent hypoxemia with or without severe distress despite high oxygen flow requires immediate assessment for ventilatory assistance, and such infants may require continuous positive airway pressure, that is CPAP, or invasive mechanical ventilation. The child should be placed in sitting posture or against the shoulder of the mother with head and chest elevated to at least 30 degree with neck slightly extended. Oral and nasal secretion should be frequently suctioned. Fluid therapy. Oral feeding is always encouraged if the child is able to feed orally, but if due to respiratory distress child is not able to feed orally, nasogastric feeding can be given if the child is hemodynamically stable. If the child is hemodynamically unstable, nasogastric feeding could not be given. We have to give intravenous maintenance fluids. We usually administer isotonic fluids intravenously, and it is administered when the child has severe respiratory distress, marked tachypnea, that is respiratory rate more than 60 per minute, or the infant is having apnea. Now coming to drugs. Most of the drugs which have been tried for acute bronchiolitis have not been proven to have a certain benefit in every study, so they may have some role that may vary on case to case basis. So, first drug is racemic epinephrine. Mucosal edema is an important component of airway obstruction in bronchiolitis. So, a combined alpha adrenergic and beta adrenergic agonist, that is racemic epinephrine, can be given in nebulized form, which helps in reducing mucosal edema and relieving airway obstruction. Another drug is salbutamol. Salbutamol is a bronchodilator. Bronchodilators produce an erratic and unpredictable response in infants, so the child may be given a trial of inhaled salbutamol. If on trial of inhaled salbutamol the clinical condition of child improves, it can be continued further. If we don't find any clinical improvement after initial trial of salbutamol, it should not be continued. The third drug which can be used for acute bronchiolitis is nebulize 3% hypertonic saline. It again works on the principle of reducing mucosal edema, but there have been some studies which say that the reflex irritation of airways because of hypertonicity of saline may lead to increased mucus production. Still, it can be given in nebulized form, and after initial therapy we can see for the response in clinical improvement of symptoms, and if there is clinical improvement of symptom, hypertonic saline nebulization should be continued. So, ribavirin is an antiviral drug which is given only in specific cases of severe bronchiolitis in those patients who are on invasive ventilation or who have congenital immunodeficiencies or who have hemodynamically significant congenital heart diseases. Ribavirin requires continuous aerosolized administration for 18 to 20 hours in a day, and it is a costly drug. So, its use is very limited to very specific cases. Moreover, it has been found to be teratogenic. The nebulized ribavirin, which can be inhaled like an aerosol by the healthcare personnel, can produce teratogenic effects in healthcare personnel. Hence, its use is very limited, only for specific cases in acute bronchiolitis. So, to sum up, the mainstay of therapy of acute bronchiolitis is supportive. With all the supportive management during the acute phase of 5 to 7 days, most of the infants tend to improve, and then they can be discharged. So, an infant is considered ready for discharge if there is no need of supplemental oxygen for at least 10 hours, there is minimal or no chest retraction, the infant is feeding normally, and the infant is active. If we have satisfied all these criteria, we can discharge the infant. Coming to prognosis, the case fatality rate is less than 1% in case of acute bronchiolitis. Most of the infants recover within 5 to 7 days. Death, if occurs, it occurs due to respiratory failure or apnea. The symptoms usually persist for a median of 12 days and then they gradually resolve. The incidence of subsequent wheezing is higher in children who have had bronchiolitis, and that is a long term complication of bronchiolitis which may be seen later in life. Coming to prevention. So, pooled hyperimmune RSV specific intravenous gamma globulin and pavlizumab, which is a monoclonal antibodies given intramuscularly, these two have been found to lower the severity and incidence of acute bronchiolitis in children with history of prematurity and those with concomitant congenital lung disease or congenital heart disease. So, in such patients, RSV immunoglobulin or pavlizumab may be tried. So, pavlizumab is recommended for infants that are high risk because of prematurity or other medical problems such as significant lung or congenital heart disease. Once initiated for a given RSV season, which usually starts from September till March, it needs to be continued for the full duration of that season. It is an expensive drug and it needs once a month intramuscular injection. So, pros and cons should be weighed and then it should be decided whether these preventive measures should be given to a particular infant or not. So that's all about bronchiolitis. You will be getting a small questionnaire on this, which you will have to submit within 24 hours of attending this lecture, and that will serve the purpose of your attendance. Next lecture will be on laryngotracheobronchitis. Thank you and bye.